Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Appraisal Buzzcast. We've really been loving the feedback we've been getting from everyone. I'm Jim Morrison, and today we have Joan Trice, CEO of Allterra Group, and Craig Capilla of Franklin, Greenswag, Channon, and Capilla. And we'll be touching the topics that appraisers need to know about to protect themselves from liability. Joan, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jim, and welcome, Craig. I'm in sunny Sarasota. Where are you, Chicago?
I am in absolutely frigid Chicago this morning.
What's the temp? I have to get my vicarious.
When I walked out to take the kids to school this morning, it was minus 6 degrees at the house here. I've actually seen already, apparently somewhere out in the west suburbs, it was minus 20. So it is not a very pleasant morning here in the Chicago area.
All right. Well, on that chilly note, then let's talk about some scary stuff. What happens to an appraiser when they get a complaint from their state appraisal board? You handle a lot of these kind of cases. What kinds of cases are you seeing right now, Craig?
Sure. We're seeing all sorts of issues at the moment. I will say, and this is purely anecdotal at the moment, I don't have the numbers to back this up, but I would say over the last 3 or 4 months, we've really seen an uptick in the volume of complaints coming in. I know our phone has been ringing quite a bit more frequently than it had been for the last several years. I don't want to push the panic button and spin everyone out on this. So I'm not going to tell you this is what we were seeing back in 08 and 09 and all of that when I was in as a prosecutor for the state. It's not that by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think we're seeing a bit of an uptick at the moment in complaints. Now, some of them are your stock standard complaints that you would typically see really in any circumstance. What you end up with is you end up with somebody on the end of this report with frustrated expectations. Frequently, it's the borrower. And so there is oftentimes a misunderstanding of what the appraiser is trying to communicate in the report. Just seen one recently where the borrower was the complainant and wrote in a whole laundry list of, well, we've put this stove in and we've added a door that didn't exist here in this room and we did this. And then the appraiser says, no updates in the last 15 years. And I was like, aha, I don't even need to see the report to understand that the appraiser was teetering between a C5 and a C4 and that worked its way into a C4, but that's all it is. And that's all it's ever going to be. The borrower reading this doesn't understand any of this codification. And so they go, the appraiser just got it wrong and it was sloppy. And then they turn it into the state and it carries off from there. We've been seeing those, we've been seeing that since the dawn of the UAD. That's not going anywhere anytime soon. But those types of misunderstandings by a reader are your common complaint. Then there are the circumstances when an appraiser may in fact miss something. They miss a zoning classification. They miss a square footage on something because they mismeasure. Those types of issues come up. A lack of support for adjustments made. And I think as our conversation evolves today, we'll probably come back to the importance on adjustments and supporting adjustments because it's really beginning to rear its head in other areas as well. But the issue that's got everybody up at night right now is we are seeing an influx of bias and discrimination related complaints. And that's nationwide. I'm in 8 or 9 different states right now handling those types of concerns. I know in Illinois, where I'm located, I think at one point I had heard we had 10 or 12 different appraisers turned in for bias or discrimination related complaints. But it's not just here. It's not just major cities. It's all over the place. And we're seeing a lot of that.
Okay. Well, then before we dive into the racial bias issue, let's back up a minute and let's chat about the consumer aspect of what their rights are. And of course, you've probably read by now the report that came out earlier this week from the appraisal subcommittee on the study of the foundation and USPAP, et cetera. And one of their recommendations, which gave me pause, was that they want to name the consumer as an intended user, which that scares the bejesus out of me. What are your thoughts on that?
Not so. I agree. I find that very concerning. And in fact, since the advent of the modern 1004, or really the modern GSE forms, so round about 2005, there have been a number of people, including when I finally got into this game in about 2008, there's been a number of us screaming that the GSE forms need to remove the certification with language that says that the borrower may rely on this. I would argue, no, they can't. It's not for them. Right. It's for the lender or anyone up the lending chain. If you're talking secondary market and all that, I get it. Anybody who's in that commerce chain, that makes sense. But particularly for the borrower in a circumstance, they really shouldn't be able to rely on it. And I think for two reasons. It's not intended for them. It's not really written for their consumption. It really isn't. It's risk assessment for a lender. Let's start with that. But also, the average consumer is not qualified to read and understand the report. And so you have an inherent conflict there already where standard one, the appraiser must go through the proper analysis, the proper development of the assignment. Standard two, the appraiser must appropriately communicate those assignment results, the ultimate opinion of value. You take your stock standard typical form report and hand it to a borrower, and it's a walking standard two violation because the consumer is not prepared to understand the reporting format that is preferred and oftentimes required by the client.
Correct.
It's too much of a mess. That scares me. I get why somebody would add a suggestion or a recommendation saying, oh, well, we just have to add the borrowers as an intended user here because they're the ones that are being harmed by this. And the counterpoint, well, and they're the ones that are paying for this. Okay, if that's what you think, then I want to see a narrative report on every assignment that is a nice full color book for someone's coffee table.
Yeah,
that's the only way we're going to eliminate it.
Yeah, the highest and best use, and explain in narrative format what functional obsolescence is. I mean, you're right. The consumer, that report is not intended to be consumed by a consumer. And my recommendation would be, I do believe in transparency, that we should have a summary of salient facts and conclusions that makes its way to the consumer. And they don't need to see the sausage making because it ends up putting the appraiser in the penalty box for telling the truth, and they shouldn't be subjected to that.
I think if the bodies in oversight of this profession want, and it's a decision to be made, if the bodies in oversight of this profession want to choose the path of transmitting everything through to the borrower and then letting the borrower rely on that, then we need to start from the ground up and start over again about what exactly it is that the appraiser is ultimately providing. It's going to be a lot longer. It's going to be a lot more thorough. It's going to be quite a bit more complicated, including then having to dial the complication out of the language in it so the average reader can understand it. And, now the third rail that nobody gets to talk about, it's going to cost a whole heck of a lot more.
A lot more money. Amen. And that's the unintended consequence here, that I don't think they thought this quite through to the logical.
If we want to commit to that, it's a choice. That's fine. But there's a lot that comes with it. And I'm not sure everybody's willing to sign up for all of that.
Right. No, I couldn't agree with you more. Well, let's do this, Craig. We'll break right here for a commercial message. And then when we come back, we'll talk about that racial bias stuff going on out there.
Sounds like a plan.
All right.
Whether you're looking for an authoritative textbook or detailed information on current valuation issues and specific property types, you'll find what you need at the Appraisal Institute store. Choose from more than 70 print and digital publications. Shop at appraisalinstitute.org/store.
All right, welcome back, Craig. So let's dive into this incendiary topic of racial bias and how it has seeped into the appraisal profession. Understand you have been fielding some of these complaints. What can you tell us?
Sure. We have received a number of these files in our office at this point. And there's certainly quite a few more going on nationwide at the moment. I've been in touch with other attorneys that are handling matters in other locales as well. The nice part about it is we're not a large community of folks handling these sorts of things, but whenever we do stumble across somebody else, we like to share information where possible, because there's certainly a commonality of approach helps. We had the same sort of thing going on a handful of years, 5-6 years ago, when there was the big Yano financing litigation train out of Texas that had sued hundreds of appraisers nationwide on old bad debt. And there was a lot of interaction between defense counsel on that. I think as these cases become more prevalent, we're going to see that again here. And what we're getting right now are, and I'm seeing it at the state board level, I'm seeing it across regulatory agencies with HUD investigating matters on a federal level, state human rights commissions, state attorney general's offices. It's a scattershot approach to how these are handled. Sometimes the complaint is turned into both the license board and a human rights commission at the same time. Sometimes it's not. Maybe it'll take one track or the other. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of consistency across that. But what there does seem to be a lot of consistency regarding is the sorts of allegations that are contained within the complaint. And I sort of alluded to it earlier in our discussion. Adjustments is a key feature right now. And understandably, there's some confusion about that. Again, just as the average consumer is not necessarily trained or skilled to read a GSE form report, likewise, the average consumer does not really understand the methodology of an appraiser in selecting sales, adjusting various characteristics between those sales and the subject. So oftentimes the complaint is styled in a manner of the appraiser, because they are biased against me, selected properties that are worth less than mine and don't have the same characteristics as mine. They didn't give me enough credit for this aspect. A lot of these are location adjustment concerns. Why didn't you use these sales in this other area? My house is totally like that house. How could you only use this? How could you only use the sales on my street? My house is better than those houses. Those types of concerns. And I'm just going to come right out and say it here. I truly believe the complainant in these cases believes what they are alleging here. I don't think this is some nefarious attempt by folks to go, oh, this is where the money's at, I'm going to go grab it. I genuinely believe these folks believe they've been done wrong, in large part because what happened? They didn't get their refinance that they were expecting. They've been in the property X number of years. Everybody knows property's doing nothing but going up like a rocket ship at this point. So mine must have too. Well, now here's what I want to refinance it for. Not that the appraiser knows what that number is, but surely they must have prevented me from getting to that number in my refinance. What's worse, oftentimes somebody goes out and gets an additional appraisal, and wouldn't you know it, it comes in exactly at the number they're looking for. And so it's the first appraiser that was clearly biased and discriminating against the borrower. Now, I don't want to speculate how it is that the second or the third appraiser always magically arrives at the number somebody needs. We're not going to get into that in this conversation today,
Right.
But it doesn't do the primary field appraiser any favors when that happens.
Right. Now, so what kind of advice can you give to appraisers? I mean, you've already outlined they need to do a better job of comp selection and then supporting their adjustments. Outside of that, I mean, so FHFA in a bulletin a couple of weeks ago identified, I think there were about 16 quotes. We don't know the context of how many appraisals they actually reviewed, but they did a keyword search and there were racial comments in the neighborhood description. I mean, it was rather shocking, I must confess, when I read some of these statements. Did you see that report?
I saw that. And so to kind of touch on that idea, if your neighborhood description at this point, this might sound strange for some folks who look and they go and they pull just a plain old demographics list and they slap it in and go, this is what your neighborhood is. This is census data. Here it is. Here's the racial makeup of this neighborhood. Get it out. Don't need it. There's no point in doing that. Other things that I still do see on occasion that I would encourage people to be careful how you write something, because you don't know how the reader is going to take it. Oh, we were later asked to consider property X. The appraisal management company reached out and asked that we consider these 3 additional sales, and we reviewed property X, and the subject is in an inferior neighborhood to property X. Well, I know what you mean. You know what you mean when you write it. But the person who's sitting in their home and this is their castle isn't probably going to take too kindly to that. And they don't necessarily know what you intend by a word like inferior. Why is it inferior? Because of how I look and how my neighbors look? I think there is a misunderstanding here, and I think there is a genuine belief on behalf of the complaining parties. So I would strongly caution appraisers to think twice about the language you're using in describing your methodology and your approaches here. I always encourage people on a regular basis to go back, review your report. I don't really have a problem with boilerplate language so long as it's applicable to the assignment. But boilerplate language all does get stale at some point.
Right.
If you're still using phrases like that are just, oh yeah, this is how I describe this consideration, and this is how I describe my approach here, just drop that in there. If you haven't read it in a while, you might be surprised what you've been saying for the last decade. So maybe go back and take a look at that. The other aspect to all of this is, as always, it comes back to the work file. Now, more than ever, it's easier. There are software platforms that preserve everything you look at, and it will set it off to the side for you. Storage is virtually free. I understand that the bare minimum here is to just, so long as you can access it when you need it, you don't have to preserve it in real time. I like to caution people that that's not a great safety net. And now it's less about, these are the properties that I looked at, here's how I scored them, this is how I considered it. Now it's even about having that farm list of all of the other properties you considered but decided not to include, so that you can explain, no, really, I did look and consider that property, and it wasn't appropriate as a comparable sale in this assignment because XYZ. I don't want to push anyone to having to write a full thesis on that in each report, but you'd better at least be able to show your work if you're called to task on that. And so tightening up the work file here, as always, this is the genesis of any complaint. The salvation lies within your work file, but also here, even more so, it's about what you looked at and what you used and what you didn't use. And that's going to go a long way to rebutting some of these concerns.
Gotcha. Let's do this, Craig. Let's take another commercial break and we'll be right back.
We didn't build Remote Val for appraisals. We built it for appraisers. With Remote Val, you are in control. Unlike hybrid valuation, you directly gather the information, photos, and measurements you need while communicating with the homeowner. And with no travel time, Remote Val increases the number of inspections you can perform. Combined with 24-hour pay and our other exclusive benefits, it's no wonder more appraisers are choosing Incenter Appraisal Management. Remote Val is fast, easy to use, and completely free for appraisers. To see a demo of Remote Val in action, visit incenteram.com.
All right, Craig, welcome back. So tell me, are appraisers the only target here, or is this affecting other stakeholders?
No, very much not. There's a good bit of action really all up and down the real estate lending chain right now, and just transactionally as well. I know of matters involving real estate brokers. Certainly lenders are getting pulled into this as well. And in a number of instances that I'm working on, as well as if you look at the Northern California federal lawsuit, the appraisal management company is sitting right next to the appraiser in that mess as well. And so really anybody that kind of has their fingers in the mix of all of this is getting pulled in at some level. You know, I think probably most relevant for a lot of the viewers for this, it's the additional concern of the appraisal management companies that are also getting dragged into it. And yes, we are seeing that in large part. Some of that is a further outgrowth of that confusion we've discussed already, which is the consumer doesn't actually know what the appraiser does or the appraisal management company does, or where the line is between them and which role, who wears what hat. There's a total misunderstanding about that. So the easiest approach is pull them both in, because clearly they both must have had something to do with this. Even for those that have a little bit of a better sense of what's going on, it's, well, the appraisal management company should have stopped the appraiser from doing that and caught it before it negatively impacted me. So there's going to be concerns about the QC that's going on at the appraisal management company. What kind of quality control process do you really have if you're letting these awful, terrible, biased appraisal reports slide through and get to the lender and frustrate me from being able to get my refinance or whatever the case may be? And overwhelmingly, it's refinances we're seeing this on.
You know, I think one of my observations in the discussion of all of this is the consumer, the reconsideration of value process. Our regulatory structure for filing a complaint is broken. So if I'm a consumer, my only avenue is to file a complaint with the state. If I have a pending transaction in front of me, I can't wait for a state board to take 6 months. I got a house alone I'm trying to close. So we need to explore a methodology for filing a complaint or a reconsideration of value process that is uniform and isn't different for each and every lender. And I think that would stop some of if we standardize the process, it would stop a lot of the frivolous complaints and allow us to focus on the ones that really do need to be rectified.
Well, I think the inconsistency across processes is frustrating for the appraiser, for the appraisal management company, and frankly, for the complainant too. Just as much as they don't understand necessarily what's in the appraisal report, they also don't understand what goes into this investigatory process and why it takes so long and why they might be certain that something was done wrong here, but suddenly a state board, nothing sudden, 8-9 months later, a state board comes back and says, actually, it was perfectly fine. We don't know what you're talking about. There's a whole mess here. And it's going to take the efforts of everyone involved to grab the wheel and steer the ship back into safe territory if it's going to get there. You know, this is being considered at all levels right now. You know, the government agencies are discussing it. The state level agencies are discussing it. I know the various professional organizations, whether it's the Appraisal Institute or the ASAs or NAR or NAA or whomever, they're all having these conversations, and that needs to happen. It needs to happen at the state level coalitions, but the individual appraiser here needs to figure out a way. I know in all the spare time that all of the individual appraisers surely have to devote to these things, they need to find a way. The individuals who are being impacted here have to come up with a way to get involved in the process and get their voice heard, because I'm telling you right now, this is a groundswell moment. The appraisal profession is going to look different in 5 years than it does right now because of these complaints and because of these concerns. And so for the individual appraiser, if they don't want to be entirely left behind in the process, you got to find a way to get involved in that conversation now. And certainly there's all sorts of people putting out good articles and posts, and all of that helps. But it's also a matter of getting it to the right people, to kind of the right bullhorns. And it's also, rather than just arguing that there is no problem and nothing's wrong, identify where there may be some problems in the process and see if you've got a solution for that. And I'm not the one that has it. I wish I could say, oh yeah, here's how you fix the whole thing and it'll be over in a year because we're going to change everything and this is how it's going to be going forward. I'm sorry, I'm not smart enough to do that. There are a number of other people in this profession, though, collectively, that probably are and can probably fashion a good solution that still gets the lenders what they need. Because remember, the purpose of these things, at least as regulated appraisals, is to be the eyes and ears of the lender as a risk assessment. So that is still the end goal in all of this. But can you do that while still achieving fair and appropriate outcomes for all of the people impacted? I suspect the answer is yes. And it's going to take a lot of hard work by a lot of smart people to figure that out. But the thing is, those people are out there and the work can be done. It's getting everyone together to do that work that's going to make the difference.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm going to urge appraisers who are listening to please join a professional association of appraisers. I'm not going to endorse any particular one. Just join one and get involved, because complaining and whining on social media is not going to move the needle forward. You really do need to organize as a group. And I think appraisers have been resistant to doing that for a long time and are suffering as a result of it. So Craig, well, thank you for joining us today, and we'll touch base with you again a few months down the road as some of these cases out there might end up progressing into a full-blown lawsuit.
Certainly. Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. I look forward to hearing from you again, provided, of course, I don't freeze in my own yard between now and then. But we'll see you the next time, and hopefully we'll start having some flowers starting to sprout or something at that point.
Sounds good to me. Thank you.
ProxyPix is the first of its kind on-demand system for getting location-specific media you need from wherever you are. Their simple-to-use platform creates an online marketplace matching people needing property photos with proxies or data collectors near the requested location. Through crowdsourcing, you can get current, up-to-date photos of anything on the map within hours, if not minutes. Never before has it been quicker, simpler, or more economical to get the property photos you need. Sign up on proxypix.com or download the ProxyPix app, available on the Apple and Google Play Store. Thank you, Joan, and thank you, Craig. We really appreciate your time, Craig. This is something that every appraiser needs to listen to, so we appreciate it. We want to thank our sponsors for helping us put these together. If you have an idea for a future Buzzcast, make sure to reach out to us at info@appraisalbuzz.com. Thanks, and have a great day.